Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're here for another quick bite. My name is Lindy Johnson, and with me is Phoebe Barron. She is a therapist and an assistant professor of counseling. And so what we're going to discuss today for this quick bite is essentially this concept of how do we document well if or when a session with the person we're working with, we're walking alongside, we're supporting through our advocacy work, if a session didn't go very well, or if we didn't really get a whole lot, maybe mom had a hard time engaging or whatnot. So, Phoebe, obviously you have plenty of documentation experience. Help me understand, in your experience, like how could we be thoughtful, accurate, and descriptive well, if maybe mom had a hard time engaging? What are your thoughts as far as what we can be mindful of there?
Well, and what I heard you ask is kind of in two parts. Like the first part being if mom was maybe resistant or combative or something like that, right? How do we represent her well and with kindness, but also accuracy? And then the problem of like, what if I feel like there was no session content at all, right? Like there was a lack of speaking, a lack of engagement kind of a thing. So as far as like representing with kindness and accuracy, some of these are going to overlap, but I think what we really want to focus in on are like observable behaviors. If we had a video camera in that session, what would we be able to see and hear? And so think through like even specific phrases that you felt were resistant or combative or something like that, right? We can write down like short little phrases like, I don't want to talk about that in an angry tone, right? And we can put quotations around, I don't want to talk about that in an angry tone. And that can be part of our documentation, right? And so thinking of like specific phrases, also thinking through body language of like being combative could look like, it could look like pacing a whole lot, or it could look like a lot of sharp and sudden movements, or a really big shift in body language from kind of relaxed to really tense. That's something that, again, if we had a video camera in the room, like we could see that. And oftentimes our initial reaction is more about like what we felt. But part of documentation, I think, is to challenge ourselves of like, is what I felt in this session, mom was being combative or resistant, is it, can I substantiate that? Can I give evidence for that with observable facts? Because if I can't, then maybe that is in the realm of opinion. In psychodynamic language, we would call that countertransference, right? What was I feeling towards the person I'm working with while we were in session? And so, yeah, some of that is just my own personal feelings, triggers, reactions. And I know the difference is between I can give observable evidence towards my opinion or I can't. And maybe that was just a feeling I was having, and I need to notice that and recognize that and kind of deal with it. But that's not something that would go into documentation.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. We talk in our training, which is one part of their onboarding for our advocates, right? But always a good refresher of like what was observable is very helpful, right? Because that's not my opinion. It's what I saw. It's what happened. It's what transpired.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that concept of that countertransference is that we also at least briefly talk in our training, but it's never enough. We talk about like we have to be aware of our opinions, our interpretations, our standards, right, of how we engage mom. Because we also, as advocates, we sit at this place where moms who are going to be served through our programming at EMA, they are coming in with a wide variety of skepticism versus trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we sit at this place of, okay, maybe mom wasn't engaged or seemed resistant, but we also have to be really diligent to monitor, like, is that my interpretation or is she shy? Do we not yet have very much trust? Is she still growing comfortable in our time together? And so I think that tension is really hard when we're thinking about how do we appropriately document this when it wasn't rainbows and butterflies, right? The relationship might be new. And so I'm curious to hear from you. I think a common scenario some of our advocates may find themselves in is, okay, maybe mom wasn't combative, but I kind of don't know how to write about her limited or lack of engagement. So what would you say there that again, to your point earlier, was observable and yet also as accurate as possible?
Yeah, so that's almost where the observable stuff becomes harder, because if mom is it, angry or combative, that's usually something that is very like outwardly directed. And so there's a lot of behavior and words and tone of voice that can go with that. But if mom is like closed off or resistant or just, I mean, gosh, she could be really shy too. And we know that things like a disorganized attachment style or something that leans that way, one of the ways that that can show itself is just by becoming like a wallflower basically and just not existing, right? That's how they kept safe. So we have to know that that is a very legitimate strategy for people to use. And it's what kept them safe in the past. So I think one of the things for us as the helper in the relationship is to go, there's a legitimate reason that this person is not engaging with me that makes sense to them. And so I think that helps deal with our own countertransference of why is she not engaging, that we remind ourselves this is probably a strategy that's kept her safe in the past. And so we can respect that. But I think, so as far as note taking, I think you can say things like client presented as disengaged, shy, not very responsive, things like that, right? That's again in the realm of opinion. Disengaged is kind of in the realm of opinion, but then you can include phrases like observed behaviors include, or as evidenced by, client demonstrated this behavior or something like that, right? Like these little key taglines that I always grab onto in order to take this from an opinion into something that is evidence-based. And we can say like client presented as disengaged, observed behaviors included a lack of responding whenever asked direct questions, short responses when asked direct questions, closed off body posture. You could even describe it, right? Maybe their knees are curled up to their chest and they're like laying their head on their knees or something like that. And so describing body posture, maybe it's a really soft, quiet, almost whispery tone of voice. So thinking through that. So posture, tone of voice, words spoken, or in this case, not spoken, right? And then you can also, like what you want to do too is document like your response to that, right? So you observe disengagement. They were very whispery. They were very short in their answers. And then your response to that was to do what, right? Was it to ask more questions? Was it to move into like more psychoeducation, more so than like question-based stuff? I also think we've got to remember that playful engagement is usually a way to draw people out and to kind of show like, yeah, we're here to do business, but we're not family services, we're not official government agencies, right? And so there is a leeway for us to playfully engage in order to build rapport. So that's even how I would phrase it, right? Like engaged in a lighter conversation or play or, you know, something like that, a game in order to build rapport.
Yeah, that's helpful. You know, when I'm trying to think of the context of our advocates, you know, all volunteer based, not trained therapists, of course, different than the seat you sit in. But I do think that language of we definitely have plenty of room for that playful engagement, right? Because our advocates are using a parenting curriculum. We also often have like some icebreakers or just simple things for them to connect with mom. So that's a good reminder for any advocate that if you're still not building rapport phase, which is obviously going to be very important for the rest of mom's programming with us, we can maybe come to session with a couple of those maybe lighthearted questions or a scenario, you know, you can only take one thing with you into this scenario. What would it be? Just kind of funny, lighthearted things. I think that's a good reminder of bringing playfulness in when someone doesn't yet know how to trust you, or if you're trustworthy, or what their answers are to various questions. But also, maybe they're not that closed off. It could just be, do we need to make sure they're understanding our question, right? I mean, we all learn differently. Maybe we are wordy in the way we ask questions. I mean, there's room for that, right? I think for us as advocates to be thoughtful of, what is the barrier? Is it that she's resistant? Is it that she's not fully understanding the question we're asking? There's definitely room for that. Also, some of the moms we serve, their first language may not be our first language. So there's also plenty of room for that, to just gain clarity. So anyway, it could be sought more clarity, could be clarified my question, rephrased my question, could be moved on towards playful engagement, or went ahead and invested in the next part of a lesson, if that is helpful for a mom. But going back to some of just the scripts that you mentioned, I think that's really helpful. The language of like, as evidenced by, is always something for our advocates to tuck in their back pocket, right? As observed by, and just reflecting what I hear you saying too, and what I would want our advocates to know is that we never want to overemphasize positivity or negativity in our session notes if it's not factual, right? So if mom didn't really engage very much, we don't want to make it sound like she was super engaged, right? And vice versa. So I always remind our advocates, like, stick to the facts. And when we stick to the facts, it's a good note. It's a good session note. But some of those favorite phrases that you mentioned of, we would probably call her mom in our notes, not client, right? But, mom was limited in her engagement as evidenced by one-word answers, frequently answering, I don't know, or not answering at all. So yeah, thank you for that support, right? And just those ideas of how to document well when maybe it was a little unengaged. Any other final tips or tricks in regards to that note-taking process?
Sticking to observable facts, and backing up, things that are a little bit more vague or more in the realm of opinion. I also love phrases like client reported or mom reported, right? And so, if they've had a really difficult week, or, they just fell from one appointment to another and you're just like a domino in this or that, right? You can say like client reported having a very busy impact schedule and appeared frazzled from that, right? As evidenced by some jumbled thinking and some distractedness or something like that, right? Frazzled might not be the most professional, way to say that, but like that's an opinion, right? And so then we can back that up with evidence. So remembering that like what they report and experiencing, that's something that we can report in a note as well. Or if they demonstrated something, like they demonstrated a lack of understanding by asking a lot of clarifying questions and things like that, right? That might be one of the things we also want to think about in notes is if someone else were to have to pick up this person at the next session, they should be able to look at my notes and kind of know some important things about them. So if they have a hard time understanding emotional concepts because they did not grow up in the same culture that you did, because we know that emotional concepts are really pretty culture is like one of the main forces in forming our emotional concepts. And so that's something that, Lindy, if you, I don't know, had to fly to Europe for a month for something, and I had to pick up your client, then I could pick that up and go, okay, I need to be really careful about the way that I explain emotional concepts to this person, things like that. So thinking through, like, if someone else were to just pick up these notes and need to just run with this, what are some of those important things you would want them to know?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Certainly, again, in our context, we have our advocates taking notes, but also our coordinators, our program coordinators are reviewing them. So there is kind of that, like, hey, we've got a couple pairs of eyes to make sure that it's thorough enough. It's clear about what actually happened or didn't happen. And that's a good point too of yes, like many times, people get sick or something happens. And so if mom ever needed to be supported by someone else or came back through a program from someone else, there would be some context about where mom's coming from. Yeah, that's good perspective. Thank you for tips and tricks about note taking and session notes, as of course you have many experiences as a therapist. Just clarifying for advocates, we are not therapists, you are not therapists. So rest easy as far as the level of note taking, but ultimately, Phoebe and I hope that this conversation helped you tuck a couple things in your back pocket and that you are always welcome to come back to this video if you need a refresher about how to write notes well, especially if you're not really sure, or maybe it didn't go as well, or what language is appropriate for lack of engagement, for example. So thank you, Phoebe, for your time. And thank you everyone for watching.